G'day guys, this is the second part of our theme around assertion resilience, and this is based on the importance of positive, practical, rational language and not labelling ourselves. It's probably important to discuss how we do label ourselves sometimes in a negative sense, again relating to conscious self-awareness and an understanding of where it comes from in the first place and how it comes from in the first place. This tends to happen when we're feeling really stressed or overwhelmed or burdening, or feeling that manipulation of mind that we've been talking about. And when we buy into the imposter almost too much, which is our anti-true self / imposter, over our true self rational, which we were discussing in the previous theme. And again, this is your interlinks and connections also in this sense. A way of labelling ourselves is in the negative language towards ourselves, the imposter language, such as, what tends to come into the therapy, such as feeling silly, feeling stupid, which is when we tend to be pointing to imposter almost too much in a language sense, which is again is always going to go to our thinking feelings 100%, and what's going to perform our identity with ourselves or our non-identity to ourselves in that case. Labelling words can be in really negative words towards ourselves, really negative language, and again this is going to represent how we think and feel, and again buying into imposter and our anti-true self. How do we combat this, and when does it tend to happen, and how do we combat this? It tends to happen when it becomes almost a naturalised learned behaviour, the ritual or mantra. Rituals can be in obsessive compulsive behaviours without a diagnosis. We all have obsessive compulsive, impulsive triggers, tendencies, all part of the same gig. But what it tends to do, if we buy into the negative labels too much of the imposter, that almost becomes our way of being, which is really not our way of being. It's really our anti-true self and the imposter sitting on our shoulder waiting for that angle, getting exactly what it wants at times, But again, when we become consciously self-aware of this, we make more of the learned behaviours. It is a process, it is a transition, but we make more of the learned behaviours, the opposite, our rationale, our true self, when we understand even when we're doing it, how we're doing it, the situations where we're doing it, which is generally where stress gets a hold of all of us, our rumination side or imposter side. And the more we consciously become self-aware in a unique sense, in an individual sense for ourselves, the more we can combat the triggers, the tendencies, and the more we can make them actions, behaviours, the internal control, what we think is what we feel, and the empowering language we're sending ourselves over disempowerment, the resilient language, the more we can make that the learned behaviour ritual mantra, which is again when the imposter tends to go away more and more, not to sit on our shoulders much, and where we learn to constantly understand, our fragilities, our vulnerabilities to some extent, and making those vulnerabilities more and more normal. What I work with a lot in a therapeutic sense is making really overwhelming stressors or vulnerabilities, normal vulnerabilities and stressors, and for the mind to process and transition into what can be a normal vulnerability if we choose to make it such, through our language representing our thoughts and feelings to ourselves. That's when people don't become overwhelmed. That's when we can acceptance language comes into the equation. The acceptance language being very factual, very rational, very positive, practical. The acceptance language is I'm going to allow myself to have an anxiety. I'm going to allow myself to be stressed because it's a normal vulnerability, a matter of fact of life, a normal part of life. But what the imposter actually wants is the opposite. It wants us to buy into the stress factors and become completely overwhelmed and then completely control us, which is what leads, in an emotional sense, again related to the amygdala, our emotional centre, which is taking in all our fight, flight, fear syndromes or anything else. It's escalating, it's biting into it. But when we do the opposite, and when we know and understand and become consciously self-aware to doing the opposite, positive practical language over not labelling ourselves, almost labelling ourselves with positive practical language, acknowledging ourselves, understanding how important it is for self-esteem, self-confidence, productivity, focus, in all avenues of our life, in a relationship with ourselves, in a relationship with others, whether it be personal sense, professional sense. The more we understand this, the more we can join the dots, so to speak. And the motivation to do is really important here. The motivation to do is how it makes us think and feel, how in control of our thoughts and feelings we can feel in a very positive, connected sense, outside of what happens in the opposite, survival limbo sense. Is your imposter? Is your anti-true self? And how the opposite, the motivation to do is in the consistency and trends and transitions to those behaviours. When we realise how it makes us think and feel more and more from day to day, that becomes the consistent behaviour, ritual, mantra. And this is what identifies us with ourselves and makes us feel good in ourselves and non-imposter, so to speak. And that's our rational true self. Perhaps think about as we live today, how examples in your own life, how this is affecting your own life, and think about in a understanding, empathic, conscious self-awareness, 50-50 middle ground sense, how when we know where the overwhelming vulnerabilities are coming from, how that's your process of change anyway, your transition, your process into really good, normal, learned behaviours for ourselves, and almost accepting the anxiety which makes us all think and feel in control of it anyway, the more we do it. Feel free to leave feedback and contact me if you feel the need. And thank you very much again for joining the community today.